Welcome to Tigrai Television. I'm Erin Imano. We'll be reading the news for you today. Stay tuned. Proceeding to the details, President Dawit Mikhail sent a letter congratulating recently re-elected President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. The President of Tigray stated his government's readiness to work with the incoming leadership in safeguarding the peace and stability of the Horn. Mohamud's predecessor, President Mohamed Farmajo administration's tenure will most notably be known for its relationship with the Eritrean dictator Isaias Afwerki that led to Somalia sending hundreds of troops for the war on Tigray. Abel Tsagabo has more.
President Mikhail sent an open letter to recently re-elected President of the Federal Republic of Somalia on Monday, congratulating him on his re-election as President of the Federal Republic. The President emphasized his belief that the reinstatement of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was a clear indication of the aspiration of the Somalian people to be an anchor of the stability and peace in the Horn. The end of the last term of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud marked the start of half of a decade of instability in the Horn, whereby his incumbent Mohamed Farmajo played a leading part. His unusual close ties to Eritrean dictator Isaias Afwerki, who is known for his attempts to destabilize the region and weaken regional institutions that encourage accountability and cooperation amongst nations in the Horn, highlight to the participation of hundreds of Somalian troops in the war on Tigray. The 66-year-old President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud is known for his pro-democratic and decentralization policy in the Horn nation that includes the provision of legal recognition to regional states council in Federal Republic of Somalia.
5 civil society organizations in Tigray, including Tigray University Scholars Association and Alliance of Civic Society Organizations of Tigray, issued a statement on Monday calling the designation of Western Tigray by human rights groups Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch in their latest report on atrocities in the area as awarding criminals. The statement also condemned the failure of these organizations to explicitly state and hold accountable the Eritrean state for its part in the atrocities in Western Tigray and asked that these faults be remedied. Our reporter Salomit Khalai has more.
Tigray University Scholars Association, Alliance of Civic Society Organizations of Tigray, Maqala University Human Rights Center, and Maqala University Legal Aid Center issued a statement on Monday opposing the joint investigation by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch on atrocities in Western Tigray for its designation of Western Tigray as a contested area, saying the choice by the human rights organizations to designate the area as such would justify crimes and atrocities committed on civilians in the area. The statement also criticized the choice of the human rights organizations reporting of the Maikadra massacre and said the organizations had been influenced by the narratives of the Ethiopian government that has so far disregarded and failed to acknowledge atrocities committed on Tigrayans. The joint statement also emphasized that it was wrong to refer to elected government of Tigray as the TPLF and requested that this will be remedied in future reports on atrocities in the region. The statement did, however, thank the human rights organizations for their role in exposing the scale of violence on Tigrayans in Western Tigray and said it was willing to cooperate with organizations in further documenting the violence on Tigrayans and bringing perpetrators to justice. The joint report by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch was issued in April and is one of the most extensive accounts of the violence committed on Tigrayans in Western Tigray.
An 8-month-long occupation of Tigray by allied Ethiopian and Eritrean forces has seen the arbitrary and mass killings of thousands of civilians, looting of private and public properties, the detention of displacement of millions, torture, and horrific widespread use of sexual violence as a weapon. Our reporters spoke with a young woman kidnapped by Eritrean forces, tortured for 2 days, and later raped by a known Eritrean official. Our reporter Sarun Tsagay has more.
On November 30, 2020, a young woman, mother of 3, traveled from her home in Gamhalo to Badime to look for her missing son and nephew. They had lost touch with one another at the outbreak of conflict. In a place called Kokomdima, she found her son but continued her search for her nephew. On December 9, while she continued to search for her nephew, she would run into 2 Eritrean soldiers who held her captive for days.
2 Eritrean soldiers found me. They locked me up in a room and knew what they were going to do to me, so I started begging for their mercy. I told them that I'm a married woman with children. I also told them about my stitches that I had gotten while giving birth through an operation. One of them said, "So what?" And then they started drinking and mocking me. It was the most horrific night in my life.
The young woman was locked up and tortured for 2 days and later raped by an Eritrean official.
በውስጥ በቤት በክላስ ውስጥ አሰረኝ መርሃዊ ይባላል የሸሸ ቤት አማሃዳሪ ማለት ነው
His name is Marhawi. He is an administrator of Sheshabit area, Gashbarka zone in Eritrea. He locked me up, beat and tortured me for 2 days. I begged him to release me, but he told me no. I told him I'm ill, and I even showed him my medication, but he didn't believe me and said I was keeping the medication for Tigrayan fighters, and then he raped me.
The survivor says that after she was raped, the soldiers tortured her for hours and called her derogatory terms, targeting her Tigrayan heritage.
ሰንበል ውስጥ ነው ያሰሩኝ 8 ቁጥር አስረው የደበደቡኝ
I was detained in Sembel. Just because I told them I'm Tigrayan, they tortured me and called me names. For more than 8 hours, I was hung upside down. They apparently called the type of torture the number 8. It was excruciating. I was crying and begging them, but they didn't listen. The man who was torturing me, they were calling him Wadgashi. He would call me Dirty Agama. He told me that I deserved to suffer because those that were fighting them were my brothers.
The survivor says that while the physical wounds may have subsided, the psychological trauma remains very much intact and has affected her as well as her family.
The sexual violence that I was subjected to has left a dark spot on my marriage as well as on my children's mental health. I was not the only one traumatized by the violence. My husband and children are also traumatized. My children don't want to hear what happened to me. It has traumatized them. They don't want me to tell my story to the press or even at the hospital. But I do it because I know there are hundreds of thousands of women like me, and I want them to come forward and get help they need, including medical care.
The violence that has been inflicted on women and girls in Tigray has been all the more traumatic due to the lack of care for both their physical and mental wounds, care that has become almost impossible to access as the Ethiopian government continues to block aid and medical supplies.
The destruction on major economic institutions in Tigray has been one of the devastating features of the ongoing conflict. During their 8 months of occupation, invading forces would loot and destroy factories and businesses across the state. Our reporters visited Dima beekeeping plant near Adigrat, where employees say the factory was target of deliberate destruction by invading forces, who had destroyed more than $500,000 worth of property. Kabro Moldabrhan has more.
Dima Beekeeping Development and Honey Processing PLC, found in Adigrat in the eastern part of Tigray, is just one of the many factories in the area deliberately destroyed by Allied forces. Alam Tagai, the general manager at the honey process plant, says soldiers deliberately looted and destroyed equipment in the factory, destroying property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
The factory is assumed to have lost over $500,000 worth of equipment here, including the site at Azbi Wamberta and the machines that process the honey. They have looted all that is useful and destroyed what was left, and then burned down the structure.
Alam says the factory used to produce more close to 6,000 quintals of honey for the purpose of export and local consumption, emphasizing that the factory brought in a lot of foreign currency for the country.
The factory owns one of the most up-to-date technologies for processing honey in the Horn of Africa. We had both the processing and packaging machinery, as well as a mechanism to ensure quality. We have certain quality assurance machines that are not available anywhere in East Africa. We had an international market, especially in Europe, Asia, and the United Arab Emirates. They destroyed it because they knew how productive it is.
Alam says this has not only set back companies like this, but have put smallholder farmers that produce the honey in crisis.
Our products has lost much of its market because it's no longer available now. This was done purposely to weaken the local farmers and to destroy opportunities for youngsters in Tigray.
Gabramadin Nugus is a security guard at the factory. He says he witnessed the destruction of the factory by invading forces.
Everything is ruined. I can only see ruins. The owners can't pay my wages now, but I have 7 people that depend on me. We depended on the income I have received from this factory. I'm in a difficult situation.
The systematic destruction of factories across the state has led to the destruction of much of the wealth created over the past 3 decades in Tigray, leaving many desperate among us a catastrophic humanitarian situation that has left many in need.
An ethnic cleansing campaign in Western Tigray has led to a massive number of internally displaced persons in Western Tigray. all of whom depend on humanitarian assistance to fulfill basic needs. Our reporter Winta Kidana has spoke to Unauthorized from Western Tigray, who is now sheltered in an IDP camp in Ma'ala and expresses her harrowing journey.
November 10, 2020 was just a normal day for Unauthorized, a mother, a merchant, and resident of Maigaba in the district of Walqait in Western Tigray, before suddenly the Fano, a paramilitary group from Amhara, arrived to their village in a weary house of the morning and started to wreak havoc.
ساعات شمنت أنا ليتي ألا أمسكم تلولي لهمنا دكسنا نحلنا ندقحقحو بمكنا ندزوريهم تلولو صويلهمنا نحنا دما بقى تخدينا ينورنا بجامع تخدينا حزنا ينصلا ينورنا قال ينورنا قلعتنا قدمتن دحرتن كوينا نداوينا مسينا ابتخزاتنا دخيمنا بقرو غعزو زين فلطنا رنا مستزلنا شجر حمام قالنا لني دحرت هذا مسينا تخزون مصيكم تخبوا لكم يومنا عاد محمد ايكيدنا
She says her and her family sheltered in a cave for days, afraid of Ethiopian forces that were committing atrocities but couldn't find food.
برخا خيدنا ندازب زبحال برخا له ناو خيدنا او قنينا نولع يبلنا نسوت يبلنا ليتينا زوصانا منم تحزنا يبلنا.
But Unauthorized says the siege didn't end there. After only sharply missing the Fano, she was forced to confront Eritrean forces that were indiscriminately shelling the surrounding area.
شعبيا بزمصنا ما معت كبين دارويه سب نقدم يزرا خبر نقتله نحنا كفقدو غدلنا توادقنا كما غطام عدلنا صبق كوينو وصينا ابرخا قنينا ايوصن تولدما مشنا هاجر سب كينا صقينا اندالمنا بلع قنينا.
Unauthorized arrived in the IDP camps in Maqala, but she says life hasn't shown any improvement. Lack of humanitarian assistance has meant that both her life and that of her children is hanging by a thread.
نحن حاملنا وزمتينا حامله بزمصنا حامله جمرنا اسكعلم معنتي منم زخبنا يا يبلنا زبل عيرخمنا غزا عيرخمنا اننا بقى سئلنا خنموتنا جنينا بطميت قلعت حزنا حمام لني دم قفيت لني عمي شجرني انا طميت كفينا.
Unauthorized calls upon the international community to play its part to ensure that basics like food and medication is able to reach the millions in dire need in Tigray today.
بقى شجرقاتنا والعلم صوتين يولنا طعمي خفينا احنا نولع سيولنا صوتينا صرحنا هاي نولع حماتنا حميمنا حق لهم كنا حميمه او زي حكمنا هاي دمراني تيولكني لمني كلالي تلاني دم قفيت بطعمني اني قبرك نخلي يبلنا لمني شجرني.
This IDP camp in Maqala alone shelters more than 7,000 women and children, all with no access to food or medication.
Art has been one of the most affected sectors since the start of the war on Tigray by Ethiopian forces, and artists that once had bright and promising future are finding it difficult to fulfill even the most basic needs. Our reporters had a brief stay with a young musician, Tigrai Haragut, and asked how his industry has been affected by the war and the devastating siege that has followed. Aragay Garamkel has more.
Tigrai Haragut is a young musician and a resident of Mekelle. He studied music at Mekelle University and got his first degree with a piano major in 2019. However, Tigrai couldn't able to fulfill his dreams at the moment, as the ongoing siege has already killed every job opportunity in Tigray.
Currently, Tigray musicians are found in a very harsh situation. For example, I used to lead my life performing in various stages and ceremonies. As you know it, our job is much related with the cultural and social life of our society. So we used to perform at wedding ceremonies, birthdays, holidays, concerts, and nightclubs. However, such kinds of occasions have been terminated in Tigray due to the deadly war and the all-encompassing siege that followed it. So these days, life for musicians has become very difficult, and we are found in a very devastating situation.
According to Tigrai, his music life has been given him the chance to tour the whole Tigray state and even far to Sudan, as he had the chance to work with different prominent artists. But currently, he hardly wins his daily needs, as the ongoing siege has turned everyone's life in Tigray upside down.
Ahadu band ዝበሃል ክለብ አርቲስት ፊሊሞን በቀለ መሳርሕተይ ንሱ ማኔጅ ዝገብሮ ባንድ ነይሩ ብጣዕሚ ኢና ብዙሕ ስራሕቲ ንሰርሕ ነርና
I used to work with the Ahadu band that is owned by artist Filmon Bekele, and we used to work a lot of things together. We were touring the whole Tigray, working with a local NGOs that is working on creating societal awareness about communicable disease and reproductive health. I also had the chance to go to Gadarif, Sudan for an intercultural exchange concert with popular Tigray musicians, and I never imagined even for a second that my life would be turned into this mess. I had very big and bright dreams instead.
Tigrai also said that he never read or heard such kind of life as the people of Tigray are living in at the moment.
ዝሕጂ ዘሎ ዕፅዋን ክባን ኣነ ከም ዝመስለን ብግለይ ኣብ ዓለም ከምዚ ነገር
I don't think such kind of life under siege was experienced at any place in the world, and I don't even think such kind of life would be experienced in the future either. Personally, this is the worst part of my entire life, because I am denied of my basic needs, and this is also true for the rest of the people of Tigray. What is worst is people are starved while they have money on their bank accounts, as services like banking, telecommunication, and electricity are cut off in Tigray by the Ethiopian government. On the top of that, it is even impossible to get help from others who live outside of Tigray, as there is no means of communication in the state. I think all these things are done on purpose, and I have no other words to describe the current situation that we are in.
The story of Tigrai is just the story of 6.5 million Tigrayans who are suffering from a man-made starvation caused by the Ethiopian government by deliberately blocking much-needed humanitarian assistance and terminating basic services like banking, telecommunication, electricity, and transportation.
Ongoing siege that has discontinued all essential services in Tigray has left millions in dire need of humanitarian assistance. But the situation is even harsher for those with special needs. Our reporters visited Maharit Gawrawahid, a displaced mother with special needs, to observe the devastating impact of the siege on her family. Wintakidana reports.
Children, the old and the weak were not spared in the violence in western Tigray that has killed many and displaced more than 1 million. The most vulnerable were forced to leave their homes in search of shelter, food, and medication. Maharit Gawrawahid is a visually impaired mother of 2. She left her home in Qorarit in western Tigray in November of 2020 and has been on the run ever since. I left my home in Qorarit in November. They told us the Fano were coming and how violent they were, so I just started running with those around me. They helped me escape and get back to my birthplace in Maigaba. I stayed there till March 2021, but things there too started to get bad, so I came here. The journey to Maqala was anything but easy. Since I'm blind, it was hard for me to keep up with the others. It was also very difficult to manage my children with all the chaos. That was the most difficult time in my life. Maharit tells us that even after she arrived in Maqala, her and her children, like the almost 2 million IDPs from different parts of Tigray, have not been able to access any humanitarian assistance. As soon as we arrived, they placed us in a school called Garab Tzaddo Elementary School. It was very difficult to get shelter there, even for those who don't have special needs. There was no water or food. It was worse for me because I got there alone, so I had no one to help me cook and feed my children. Before she left her home in western Tigray, Maharit says she was a teacher for people with special needs in Qorarit. Her and her husband had hired help to assist them with their needs in their home and care for their children's needs. My life before my disability didn't really hold me back. I was able to hire help to help with the children. I also had family close by, so I never had any problems caring for my children. Maharit says IDPs at camp in Maqala do their best to support one another, but the siege has made it impossible to access even the most basic items. This place is not attuned to the needs of people with disability. It doesn't even have food or water. People go to Arsema Church to bring water, but I cannot do that, so people share what they bring with me. But no one has food. More so, there's no medication. It's so difficult when your children ask you for food, but you cannot give it to them. Maharis says the suffering of Tigrayan mothers and children should be a burden on the back of all people around the world. Everyone should take responsibility to ensure that humanitarian assistance is able to reach Tigray. The world is just stating what's going on in Tigray, but that's not bringing about any change. It should take meaningful action. There are more than 2 million internally displaced persons in Tigray whose suffering has been exacerbated by the almost a year-long siege on Tigray that has made it impossible to access food or medication in the region.
Well, that wraps up our news for the hour. Next up, we have Tigray Television's original production on the environmental impact of the war on Tigray. Stay tuned.